Hello there everybody, Brandon here coming to you from the studio with another paint along with me video on a small 6x8 canvas. This time we're going to have a look at what I am calling Pine Forest. Want to check this one out and paint along with me? Let's do it. Alright, what I have here is another small 6x8 canvas, and I am going to start with a 3/4 inch wash brush. Any larger brush that you got that you can do some canvas covering with quickly that will allow you to fade some colors and blend some colors will work. And we're going to be doing a bit of a pine forest here with maybe a sunset that's going on off behind it in the distance. It's kind of glowing through the trees, so I am going to be using some cadmium orange here. Now if you don't have cadmium orange, you can make you some orange out of some yellows and reds that you've got. But if you've got cadmium orange, that's what I'm using here. And I'm going to start with a fair bit of that cadmium orange on my brush, and I'm going to add just a hint of medium yellow to it to lighten it up just a little bit. I'm going to start over here on my left side and see what that gets me. I'm essentially looking for a little bit deeper orange color on my left side. I'm going to brighten it up and fade it over and lighten it up as I move to the right. I'm going to add more yellow to the mix as I move to the right, and then I'll ultimately bring in a little bit more titanium white. So I've now added more yellow and a little bit of titanium white to this mix. And a lot more white over here in the right corner. Now I'm going to take a drier brush and see about blending that in a little bit. Alright, that's a pretty good starting point for our sunset in the background. I'm going to give that a few minutes to dry before I start working over the top of that. And we'll get started putting in some distant background tree detail. In the meantime, while it's drying though, I think I'm going to go ahead and come in here below and put in what's essentially going to be our ground in the foreground. And how I'm going to do that is I'm going to start with this darker orange that we've got in the corner, and I'm going to add just a hint of raw umber to it. To brown things up a little bit, and come in here off in this distant corner and bring some of that in right along the edge. And I will add now a hint more raw umber to that mix to darken it up even more, and put just a touch of Sap Green in with it. Come in right below that and start to add in the indications of some distant things back there. They're along the ground. Now we need some yellow ochre and some raw umber brought into this. Come along in here and draw a much darker line. And realistically, we can just go ahead and finish the rest of this foreground with kind of a mix of yellow ochre and raw umber. We're going to come back in and put some shadows of some trees in here and some other things ultimately when it's all said and done. So okay, now the next thing I'm going to do is put in some tree detail way off in the background distance here, and it's gonna, what we're trying to achieve here is some trees that are back there that are being kind of consumed by that glow of the sun, that are not really visible, but you can still tell they're back there. So we're going to be working with that same color, but we need to darken it just a little bit against the background so you can actually see it. So I'm going to start over to the left, because that's where things are going to be the darkest anyway. And I'm going to go back into that cadmium orange color. I'm going to use just a tiny little bit of raw umber with it. And the reason I'm starting over on the left side is because over there I won't mind if this ends up being a little darker than I intended, because we're further away from the light source over here and we're going to have some darker stuff in there anyway. What I don't want to do is drop something really dark over here on top of my light source that's darker than I want without first seeing what the color is on the canvas. So I'm kind of using this as my test zone, if that's what you want to call it, to see what my color actually is on the canvas before I get too carried away with it. And any small brush will work for this. I mean, I'm not necessarily looking for full coverage of anything back here, because we're going to have a lot of this covered up anyway. And I think I am going to use the end of an angled brush like this to come in here and put in some larger indications of trees back there. Again, we are dealing with what's essentially going to be a pine forest, so there's going to be lots of trees ultimately back there. And as my paint's, or the brush is losing paint here, I'm coming all the way into my light source with a few of these. That are going to be kind of hard to see anyway. Now I'm going to add again just a tiny bit of raw umber to our mix. Start dropping in the indications of some things that are much closer now. I can see obviously immediately that that is pretty dark, so I'm going to lighten that back up some. More yellow, more orange, a little bit more titanium white. That's a little better. Now with that color on there, I'm also going to start doing the indications of tree branch out there. So I'm going to take this brush and turn it on end and start tapping in tree limb textures back there. And again, we're going to have a lot more foreground stuff going on top of this, so these will end up being way back off in the distance behind this and not nearly as visible when it's all said and done. So you don't have to be real specific with where these are going and what kind of coverage you get from them. Now it's just a matter of kind of repeating our process here and making a few more passes with some different values of what we got going on. So I'm going to go back into the Cadmium Orange now and a touch of that raw umber with it to darken it up again. This time I am trying to achieve a little darker value than what I've got going on out there. So that works pretty good. Now I'm going to start bringing a few of these right in front of my light source. Now we need to do the same thing with the limbs here now. We've got a little bit darker value. We're going to start coming in here and bringing in more limb texture. And I'm just kind of rotating and tapping that brush on the end to create this background limb texture, because again, a lot of that's going to get covered up again ultimately in the end. Now I'm going to bring a little bit of this in again down here on top of my light source a little bit, just to start to show the indications of some limbs back there. And now realistically, that is a pretty good background work, and to what I mean by that is the bulk of this painting that we're going to be seeing is actually going to be a lot of our foreground work. That's all going to be off in the distance. So I'm switching to a smaller angle brush now because I'm going to be getting a lot more detailed with these next few passes of trees that I'm putting in. And this is really what's going to shape what our painting is going to ultimately look like, is what these next few tree layers are going to be. And so what I'm going to do now, smaller brush that I can do a little more finer edges with, we're going to go back into our orange, our cadmium orange, and a fair bit of raw umber into the mix now to darken this up yet again. And I'm going to start over here on my left hand side, and we're going to drop in a tree. This tree is going to be obviously darker than everything else that we've been putting in, and it's going to be sitting a little further down on the canvas here because it's going to be a little closer to the foreground. And we're going to do several of those. And you just have to kind of pick your spots. Maybe there's a tree or two that you've put in there already that you don't particularly like the looks of. So you can use this set of trees to cover that up. And just go over the areas that you don't like the looks of the best. Now we need to do limb texture on those as well, but I'm going to come in here and define out a little more obvious limbs on these, since they are indeed getting a little closer into the foreground here. Alright, now we really need to start bringing in some detail into some foreground trees here to make this thing, or tie it all together. So I'm going to go into raw umber and black to darken things up a lot. And I'm going to bring in a rather large tree, I think, right in here. Heck, we'll just make this one go completely off the canvas. Although I do think I'm going to put in another completely off the canvas one right in here somewhere. I want to create a few in front of this light source right here that are still a little bit further away from the foreground. I'm going to go back into raw umber. I'm going to add a little bit of red to this mix. Red along with the cadmium orange. And I'm going to put a few in. Adding that little bit of red to it is going to help it have that little bit of a appearance that it is directly in front of the light source. And we're also going to highlight these things out a little bit to further make it look like that light source is glowing behind these trees. Alright, now maybe let's put one right in there. Now we need to add some more limb texturing back in there. And I'm going to add a lot of red to this mix. To keep the red in the mix as it's closer to the light source over here. And brown it out a little bit more as I move away. Now I'm going to add some more cadmium orange to my mixture that I'm doing this tree texture with. Orange things up a little bit more right here close to our light source. And I'm going to add now some titanium white to that as well. What I'm looking for here is to be able to go back in to create some distant limb texture back there around this light source. So I want to really lighten up I'm going to lighten up the edges of some of these trees right in here that are right in front of our light source, to where it really looks like that light is basically pinching in the dark areas of those trees to right in the back center of them. And then I'm going to bring that highlight color in onto the right side of some of these other mid-ground trees back here. Now I need some more foreground limb textures going in here with that highlight on there that is being caught by the sun on some of them. Now let's bring a little bit of Sap Green into our mix. Because this is a pine forest, there's going to be some green in there. And just start to introduce that green into a few places. It's going to be closer to us. Maybe this is a good time to bring that green down in here, and there's some bushes and things going on. And we're going to put shadows behind these trees too. Now I need to clean up my distant horizon line a little bit. I can see if you've got a line going on back there like I do, I need to clean that up slightly. So we're going to put some distant bushes and stuff back there as well. You can do a number of things here. Some yellow ochre, some brown, some white. And again, this is just to break up my line on my horizon back there a little bit. Alright, now we need to start shading out some of these trees here. Basically going to go into the mix that we painted our tree trunks with here. So some brown, tiny bit of red, maybe a little bit of yellow ochre in there as well, because we don't know what's on the ground. And come in here and start putting some shadows into these trees. Now initially I want this to be a little bit lighter, because I'm going to fade that shadow out and then come in with darker in the middle of it. Basically every tree that's even remotely into the foreground, and dropping a angled shadow color behind it. And then to a certain extent we can go up in there and give the indication of some shadows from those trees off in the distance as well. Now we're going to add more raw umber into that to darken it. And come in centrally behind the tree and make that shadow color a little darker right down the center. Basically we want our shadow to be dark right down the middle and then start to fade a little bit as it gets to those edges. Now while I've got that color on the brush, I'm going to come in here with some foreground limb texture that's real close to us. It's kind of blocking that light. Now I'm going to add a little bit of bark detail to some of these closest foreground trees, and how I'm going to do that is just basically lighten up my brown value a little bit here with that little bit of red mixed into it. So raw umber, a little bit of red, and a little bit of titanium white, where I can come around here and put in just a little bit of bark texture detail with the corner of this brush. And I'm just kind of tapping and touching the end of it, not covering up the whole tree obviously, just touching it in to create little highlights of bark on it. This tree is close enough to us that we'd be able to see some of that, and so is this one over here. Now I'm going to lighten it up a tad bit more with just a hint more titanium white and a hint more red, pinking it up just a little bit, and come off my front leading edge of the tree there that's catching the most highlight, and just blend that back just a little bit. Maybe just a hint of it on these couple of mid-ground trees back there. Alright, so now I'm going to move to a liner brush and put in just some random marks along the ground here, some sticks and limbs and things. And so some of these are going to be dark, some of these are going to be light, because you're going to have shadows, you're going to have twigs, limbs, who knows what's going on down in here. So in a few places I'm going to bring in some raw umber with a little bit of black to create a few shadows along the ground of whatever's down there. Now I'm going to come in here on some of these, maybe these 3 closest foreground trees, and use my liner brush to put in some limbs that are coming off of them. So on the right side I want them pretty light. I want them with my raw umber, maybe a little bit of yellow ochre and a little bit of red, and then some titanium white to lighten things up. I'm gonna put a limb out there. A little bit of the indication of the top of some on the other side of the tree, but on the other side of the tree I want to darken things up on the back. So I'm going to take that mix that I just had and drop some black into it. Maybe put a few of those over here in front of our light source. So I'm pretty close to a finished product, but I wanted to do a couple of things, or at least one thing, to kind of create a little bit more drama and mood to this color as it's moving over here on this left hand side. I want to glaze over that orange a little bit, and I'm going to use red and raw umber and a little bit of titanium white to do it. I'm going to take some titanium white, thin it down here, add some red, some raw umber to it, until I have a pretty thin mixture that I can go in here with. It's kind of a subdued kind of creamy pink color. It's pretty thin. I'm gonna start over here and see what I get with that. That's not bad. I'm gonna glaze over some of this orange back there. Now this is just me looking at my finished product and saying I want to make a little change to it. If you're happy with what you've got sitting in front of you, then call it a finished product. Ultimately, I should have done this before I started the rest and created a little different fade in that background if I knew obviously ahead of time that I was going to want to do that. Hindsight's always 20/20, right? At this stage in the game though, I'm just kind of ad-libbing with a glaze to create a little bit more drama with my sunset back there, I guess you would say. And ultimately I may end up having to come back out here and add some more detail on my trees, and I'm covering some of that up. Now I'm going to try to kind of blend that. I'm going to add a little bit of orange to it now to try to blend that into the orange that I had out there, so it's not such a drastic change. All right. Yeah, I feel a little bit better about my colors back there. I can clean up a few of the lines on my trees and then call it a done deal. So I'm going to move back into some of this darker color here and touch in some now maybe one more pass or two of some limb texture and darken things up here in front of us. Add a little bit of green to our mix again. Now I'm a good bit happier with that finished product there, so that gives us a nice scene of a pine forest with a blazing sunset maybe going on out there in the distance. Got a little bit of color going on here in the foreground of some things, make it interesting. Hope you guys had fun painting along with that one. Until next time, happy painting, everybody.